Dr. Gule, thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But
Yes, thank you so much.
Before we walk into the future, can you tell us a little bit about your own background? Where did you grow up?
Okay, so I grew up actually in Swaziland, now called Eswatini, the Kingdom of Eswatini. I grew up in a rural area called Mkochane, and I'm a fourth born in a family of 5, 4 boys and 1 girl, and I only could start school when I was 10 years old.
So tell us, what was your dream career when you grew up?
You know, given the fact that I grew up in a rural area and the only person that at the time I saw outside my family who seemed to have a good life was actually a security guard. So at some point I thought, this is what I'm going to be when I grow up. I think I was about maybe 7, 8 at that time. Because here is this guy wearing his nice uniform. So I thought, oh, okay, this looks cool. I would like to grow up and be this. That was the first dream I had.
And who inspired you in your early days?
In my early days, I think my parents actually, in terms of what I saw them doing, because they started working, and my mother was working obviously at the time as a maid in a compound, and my father was a logger, but just the way the two of them led their lives, and the way they displayed that in front of us when we're older, and I think just the sheer perseverance, because I mean, my father, the salary wasn't that much, but he was able to send all my siblings to school, so that was an inspiration. And of course, not really understanding what was going on. I was young, but that was an inspiration. But later, I think the person who really had a fundamental impact on my life was my high school teacher, a Reverend Makeu. He really made a big impact in my life.
Now, Jerry, since you mentioned school, you attended both the University of Pittsburgh and the Harvard University Graduate School of Education. Can you share a couple of highlights from your education career?
Yes, thank you. So in fact, I trained to be a teacher. So when I finished my bachelor's degree, the intention was to go into high school teaching 2 subjects. My favorite subjects were history and English, but I only taught for 2 semesters, and I got recruited by my alma mater, the University of Botswana and Swaziland, and they gave me 3 positions to choose from, which was obviously a luxury. To be a registrar of the university, to join the faculty of English, or to go into management education. Management education excited me, something that I hadn't done. So that's how then I ended up going to the University of Pittsburgh to pursue a master's degree in education, but focusing mainly on the leadership aspect of education, leadership and management of education. I got introduced to that. And I was actually being mentored by a guy from the UK who was working in Swaziland as part of the USAID support team there. And this guy, who had been doing management education across the continent at that time for almost 26 years, then introduced me to all this. So that's how I ended up at University of Pittsburgh, came back to teach at the university. Actually, we started a diploma in adult education. My stream was emphasis on management and supervision, but primarily it was towards the public service. How can you make public sector managers excellent managers? Because most of the training and the education and the books are all geared towards the private sector. So our extension arm of the university was saying, we need to make sure that if we're going to drive development, we need to educate and train the public sector managers. I then went back to do another master's and the PhD then at Harvard University, still pursuing this line of education. How do you marry what happens in the workplace, in the field, and what happens in academia. So and I was focusing on education and management education at the time.
Now today you are the CEO of the Institute of People Management, and before that you were holding senior leadership positions at the likes of Total, PwC, and Standard Bank. Looking back over your career, Jerry, can you maybe share a couple of highlights, leadership highlights?
Yes, thank you so much. So I basically left the university to then join the private sector. I started off at SAP as a training manager, and responsible for all the training that the organization ran. This was their plant or their mill in Swaziland. Then my wife, who was born here in South Africa, decided that, honey, I'm going back home because she had been in Swaziland as part of the old system of people being pursued if they political, and her parents and one of her uncles was involved in the PAC, and the feeling was that I think the family just felt uncomfortable with the previous regime. So when she came back here, and me and the boys had to join her, and I started working at Standard Bank. At Standard Bank, I was responsible for I was manager development program. So all the leadership, supervisory management courses, making sure that those were properly designed. We had facilitators that could run those programs or suppliers that could do that for us. So I really enjoyed that time. And it was at an interesting time because Standard Bank was changing leadership. Mike Fosler was leaving, and Jaco Mare was coming in, and he wanted a certain brand of leadership style that he wanted to see in the bank, young talent coming through. It was a very exciting time for me to be involved in that project. I then left, worked for Bromo or Cadbury, a subsidiary of Cadbury Food, Cadbury's Food, and then I went over to PwC as a consultant within the HR space, focusing here on HR strategy and so forth and so on. I worked there for a while. That worked for a while. I mean, consulting is a very tough business, and at the time, the venture that we were pursuing at PwC, I think our partners realized we were not going to be making a lot of money in this particular line of business. So they started closing it down, aspect of it closing it down. I then joined Total, and the brief at Total was very clear. The company had signed the liquid fuels charter and needed to make sure that that charter actually came to fruition. The PE partners and that they were successful in helping the business to transform, and that was my brief. So I joined as the manager transformation. Within about 6 months, I was promoted to general manager transformation, and later on then became the general manager HR and transformation, as well as having procurement, the goods and services reporting to me. An exciting time to see the whole transformation journey being successful. I was very proud of the time that I spent at Total. As you say, Eberl, I'm now I'm the CEO of the Institute of People Management. I've just been there. This is my 4th year. It's been, again, an interesting time, difficult times, particularly now with COVID around us. But yes, that has been my career. I'm also an executive coach. So because when I left Total, I actually retired. I decided to retire and pursue executive coaching. So I've had a couple of clients, and I with the board, we agreed that I'm not going to drop my clients. So although I focus primarily on my job at IPM, I still have clients that want to continue the relationship with me.
And can you tell us what is driving you today?
Yeah, the big driver at the moment is really realizing that life is short, right? And I must say that I was in 2011 diagnosed with prostate cancer. And I mean, when a doctor says to you, listen, my friend, this is what's happening, you reevaluate your life, you look at a number of things, and you say to yourself, why am I actually here? And what is going to be my contribution? Because you realize that you actually are not here forever. There's a time when, particularly when we are young, we think, oh, the stage is mine, I'll be here forever. So what drives me today is just understanding, once again, the brevity of life and the fact that you've got to make a contribution whilst we are here. Don't just be around and suck air. Make a real contribution in the lives of people. So one of the programs that I'm involved in on a volunteer basis is a charity in the Tembisa township. And that charity focuses on education. I'm the chairman of, it's called the Love Trust. And our pride is to build the best township schools in South Africa, not just in terms of aesthetics, the buildings, but the content. And we've been very excited to see that our teachers, what they are teachers, that these are the poorest of the poor. But when it comes to performance, when we do the annual assessment results nationally and where these kids are scoring, my heart gets gratified. So that drives me to make a difference in the lives of other people.
So, Jerry, looking into the future, and I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
Yeah, I think the future of leadership, I think as leaders, we are called to care. I think more and more, if we're going to be successful, this is the one key quality that leaders must really display. Because to lead is a privilege. To be in a position of leading at whatever level, particularly if you have the epitome of an organization, at the pinnacle of an organization, it is such a privilege. You can impact lives positively, or you can scar lives. So the future of leadership, for me, it means leaders must care, must show that they care in as much as they drive for results, but drive those results with people and people understanding that they care. Because when people understand that, they bring their best game. They actually, I've been, as a leader, one of the things that has really surprised me and gratified me is to hear my team saying, or rather saying and wanting to do more because they don't want their leader or their boss to fail. I mean, for me, and it's because of what they see you do for them as their leader, how much you care. So that's the future of leadership as far as I'm concerned, caring.
And what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future leaders?
Yes. The greatest lesson, and I reflect on my own life, and I sometimes look back. My father passed on when I was very young, and I say to myself, some of the things that I've been able to achieve is because other people, sometimes strangers, stepped up to help me. And that is a great lesson for me. And on my journey, that is something that I also really am determined to do. I think what leaders must, what I've learned in this journey is that it is important to show, to tell, and to do. As a leader, you don't just tell and command, but where it is necessary to show how stuff is done, how things should be done. You roll up your sleeves and you do it. You don't just say, because I'm a leader, I'm only going to be backing orders. No, you are part of the team. You work with the team. And in fact, what you exhibit, wherever you are in the public arena, I always say this, that the test of leadership, of true leadership, is actually what happens within the four corners of your own home. Because when you go out there, you need the support from your family, and you will not get the support if at home you are a tyrant. You can't be schizophrenic. So that's one of the lessons that I've learned. And my wife has been really instrumental in this, because there was a time when we had a young family and my wife said, honey, I can see that the world loves you. You are doing a lot of things. You are committed to a lot of things, but can you also just be a leader, be an example here? That has stayed with me. The fact that we exercise our leadership and it blossoms out there, but it starts from where we are, where we live. That's what I've learned in my journey.
And when you speak to aspiring leaders, Jerry, what is it you tell them about social media? How should they navigate social media to build their own leadership brand?
Yeah, I think social media is important. What is social media? Social media is only a stage where we display who we are. But I also think that we've got to be very careful. So when I talk to, particularly when I coach the people that are my clients that I work with, and they want to expose them, they want to have presence. On social media, you can't fake it. You've got to be real. Okay, you've got to be who you are. As a leader, you actually shouldn't be faking it. You have to be authentic. You have to be genuine all the time. So I speak about that don't try to be a different person on social. Use social media, but use it responsibly. Be you, who you are, and also be simple. In social media, you don't have to be complicated as you share your thoughts. You've got to be simple so people can resonate, can connect with you. But certainly, it is a platform to be used.
Now, Jerry, what is your advice for future leaders when it comes to challenges? What would you say are some of the biggest challenges future leaders should expect to encounter in their career?
Yeah, and in all the different aspects where people lead, it could be in the private sector, in the public sector, in the non-governmental sector, and so forth and so on. In all organizations, succeed, and that's why I made the IPM, succeed because of people. The biggest challenge that leaders will have, and which I'm sure past leaders have had, we also have those challenges, is this whole thing around trust. There's a lot of sayings around trust. Trust must be earned, and so forth and so on. Franklin Covey says something very, very interesting, that sometimes you've got to extend smart trust. Where there is, and trust is going to be, I mean, there's a trust deficit in the world. People don't trust, for instance, organizations today, big organizations, small organizations, the people don't trust leadership. And social media has made that actually worse because a lot has been said, wrong stuff is said, and people, and sometimes fake news develop so fast because of the fact that we have all these tools. And how do you then, as a leader, make sure that people can trust what you say? We've got to be consistent. And we've got to extend trust, even when people have no trust, show that we trust them. And it is one by one that we're going to win the trust. So trust is going to be a big thing. Secondly, complexity. I mean, things are supposed to be simple. Technology is supposed to make things simple for us. But you and I know things are very, very complex. Because messages move fast. As I've said, some of those messages may not be true, but you are no longer just managing your organization, you are managing an ecosystem as a leader. And how do you interact with that ecosystem? Do you have the skills, the capacity to work with that ecosystem? So complexity is a big thing. And of course, speed. We've got to work at speed, but that speed has to be tempered because we now know that it leads to burnout. You cannot, if you don't take care of yourself, and leaders are guilty of this. We don't take care of ourselves. And for me, I've already referred to my own health situation, that it was a wake-up call that you need as a leader to do your own. If you service your car, you do need to service your body. So that's a big challenge. That speed that we always are driving ourselves, but we need to slow down and listen to our bodies. So slowing down is a big challenge because it's difficult for leaders to do that.
And Jerry, if you were to design a curriculum for future leaders, what are some of the new skills you would want to factor in?
Yeah, I think I would like to factor in the fact that leaders need to accept that they are vulnerable. This mature mentality around leadership, which we have had, because remember the whole literature around leadership comes from the military. And the military, a soldier doesn't cry. A soldier is never weak. It is forward ever. But I think we have to temper that with the reality of what we know now, what we know today. And in fact, that it is not, I mean, we know that it's not just the macho kind of leadership that is required to win in the marketplace, but it's actually leadership that is comfortable with complexity, with diversity, and diversity in all its forms. So I would really put that in make sure that people understand that they are comfortable with diversity, the diversity that surrounds them as leaders. They are able to use that diversity. And also the power of silence. You know, sometimes as a leader, we feel obliged that we should provide all the answers, which of course is stupidity, because that's why you surround yourself with people, you hire people to work with you, and we should allow those people that are around us to bring their best game, and we only facilitate. A leader is there actually to facilitate, to make the work easy for the other people. So we should harness those skills. We will never ever have all the answers, particularly in a complex world um, that we live in today. And of course, learn to let others speak. I mean, as a leader, sometimes it's so easy because, of course, you want to get to results. You know where you want to go, but sometimes you want to finish other people's sentences, and in that way, we're not allowing their talent to come through. So just letting others speak, letting other voices be heard is a skill that leaders need to develop and need to know.
And as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story when you mentored an upcoming leader and that person took your advice to heart?
Yes. Yeah, I had a very interesting one. I had a lady who was working for an organization that works here in South Africa, as well as in the rest of the continents and in the Middle East. And her boss was sitting up in the Middle East in Dubai. And her biggest challenge was, you know, of course, yeah, you bring in diversity, culture, and so forth. And she's saying, and of course, you know, we have all these stereotypes around other people. And she wanted to now say, I need to be able to manage up. How do I do that? So we spent time just talking about, she needed to understand what her boss's concerns were, what her boss's issues were. She needed to develop a relationship even outside the workplace to understand what drives this particular person, particularly when she has opportunities to visit that part of the world and come back here and then have to work with her boss remotely. How do you manage up? How do you make sure that you are able to do that successfully and your boss is not always screaming at you because now things are urgent? And I'm glad to report that she was able to demonstrate her competence in that job, and actually ended up being promoted and being taken to head office in Dubai, and became one of the key leaders in that environment. But first of all, she had to understand who she was, what are some of her fears, how she deals with those fears, and what would be some of the interests of her own boss in order to be able to then to meet the requirements that her boss had. That was really a gratifying story for me.
And Jerry, looking back over your leadership journey and maybe your learning journey, who are some of the role models of leadership that you would recommend future leaders should learn from?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we learn from leaders from across the spectrum. And I think in the future, given the tech world in which we live in and the people that are really, really bold around this, it isn't, for me, it is always interesting to look at those tech savvy leaders. And I mean, Elon Musk nowadays is a guy to follow. Not that you would agree with everything that he does, but the creativity, the business savvy that he brings to his project, I think is a leader to look at. And of course, if we look at our own selfless leaders, there is no other than the great Dr. Nelson, our previous president, Nelson Mandela, to look at, I mean, the stuff that he has written and his example, some of the speeches that he has given. He is a leader to emulate. And I look at other young leaders. I mean, there's a guy who actually drives startups. He may not be known, and Sandile Shabam, he hasn't written any books, but if you follow his page and some of the things that he's doing quietly behind the scenes, influencing, it's interesting to watch some of those young people. And there are a couple of young ladies that I'm actually watching in terms of their own leadership, their own development as leaders. One of them is in KZN Batablempovo, just taking science education into rural schools. For me, it's interesting. It's an interesting story to watch some of these young leaders who are unsung at the moment, but I know that in the future there will be people that we talk about. But yes, for examples, Nelson Mandela is a great leader, is a great example for me. My own high school teacher is my principal, who's unfortunately late, has been a great example for me. And as I've indicated, Elon Musk is a man to watch.
Now, Jerry, how can our listeners connect with you and where should they follow you?
Yeah. So the listeners can find me on LinkedIn as Dr. Jerry Gule. Just go to LinkedIn or you go to Google to look for that and search for. You'll find me on LinkedIn. Or I'm also on Facebook. So if you go Jerry Gule on Facebook, you'll find me there. Otherwise, just a simple email if that's something that people would be interested in to start a conversation. jgule@ipm.co.za. We can connect it that way.
And last but not least, Jerry, is there one piece of advice that you would like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own leadership and their life?
Yeah. Yes. I think the one thing that has been my true north in being a leader is to listen to advice, weigh that advice from other people. Because other people, we all have blind spots, and other people see those blind spots, and they can help us to overcome them. So is to listen to advice, take feedback. Feedback, there is no feedback that is simply 100% wrong. In any feedback that you get given as a leader, you may not disagree with everything, but there is some truth in whatever feedback that people may give you. I'm a sucker for feedback. I like feedback because I know you can only improve if you get feedback. One of my bosses was actually quite surprised when I said to him, listen, well, I'm going to make that presentation. Can I please ask you to sit at the back, see how I do this presentation? And at the end of the presentation, you're going to be giving me feedback. Where did it go right? Where did it go wrong? And that helped me to do better in the next presentation. And leaders are always doing presentations. That's something that you can, so feedback is very, very useful. And lastly, please be true to yourself. We know our own hearts, we know our own consciences. And if you listen to that, if you are true to yourself, you are going to be the kind of leader that the world needs because you are true to yourself. So it's important to be true, not to try to be something that you are not.
Well, Jerry, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership and reminding us that feedback is a breakfast of leaders.
Yes. Now, thank you so much. I appreciate it.